Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Philip Coleman, and I'm speaking to you from the School of English, Trinity College Dublin, where today we are delighted to announce the establishment of the Brendan Kennelly Literary Archive here in Trinity College Dublin. In a few moments, Dr. Patrick Prendergast, the Provost and President of the College, will formally begin our proceedings. As part of his address, the Provost will also read a statement that has been sent to us today from Uachtaráin na hÉireann, His Excellency President Michael D. Higgins. Following the Provost's address, we'll hear from the librarian and college archivist here in Trinity, Helen Shenton, and she will be followed by Dr. Mary Mcauliffe on behalf of the Canelli family and the Brendan Kennelly Literary Trust. We will then hear from Professor Jarlath Killeen on behalf of the School of English here in Trinity College Dublin. I'll briefly introduce each speaker in turn before we move to the second half of the programme, which will include readings of Brendan Kennelly's works by a really wonderful group of special guests. And the event will conclude with a recording of Brendan Kennelly himself reading one of his poems. So without any further ado then, I hand over to the Provost, Dr. Patrick Prendergast.
Thank you, Philip, and welcome everyone to this momentous occasion for Irish writing, the announcement of the Brendan Kennelly Archive at Trinity College Dublin. Trinity was lucky enough to receive Brendan's archive a number of years ago, as the librarian and college archivist Helen Shenton will tell you shortly. This remarkable archive is particularly large. I believe it has almost 200 cartons, and it's particularly comprehensive. We didn't want to announce it until we were in a position to appoint an archivist to oversee the cataloguing, and happily we're now in that position. This is a big deal. The Brendan Kennelly Archive will become a launching point for many scholarly careers for generations to come. So we're celebrating with this event held in the week of Brendan's 85th birthday. We're grateful for the participation today of the poets, whom you'll hear shortly reading Brendan's poems. I know they're participating because of their love and admiration for Brendan and his work. Like many of you here, I was lucky enough to study and work in the same college as Brendan for many years. We were not, of course, in the same school or even the same faculty, but Brendan enthused and engaged with the whole college. I was always aware of how fortunate we are to have Brendan as a friend and a colleague. By his mere presence, he makes Trinity a better and a more humane place. To his students, I know he was an incredible mentor and inspiration. For all of us, he was a creative force and someone who unfailingly raised your spirits whenever you met him around the college. As Provost, I like to quote poems and speeches whenever I can. A poem can sometimes be both the hammer and the nail when you're making a point. I've got pleasure from quoting Auden and Philip Larkin and Michael Hartnett and Emily Dickinson and Ivan Boland. But most of all, I got pleasure from using Brendan's lines to get across our mission in the college's strategic plan. Though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin. Now, why use those lines? Well, because they celebrate that instinct towards regeneration, which I like to think of as central to education and research. For 4 centuries and counting, we're a university that forever begins. In 2019, the library held an exhibition celebrating Brendan's life in poetry called Forever Begins. It had wonderful photos, copies of his early books, his writings and original drafts of poems with corrections on them. It's extraordinary to see a poem come together through the crossed out words on a page. One item I particularly remember was Brendan's jottings on a boarding pass. Now, in those days when we took flights, which was years ago, we jotted on boarding passes, and This is one of the scrawlings on Brendan's boarding pass. Nothing but the walking dead suddenly near my head, the flash of a pigeon's wing, how little I know of anything. And that on a boarding pass. Imagine having a mind that can find words like that in an airport. The exhibition, which actually is still online, gives us a flavour of what's in the archive. Brendan, or the librarian, will tell us more about Brendan's papers, and let me just say that thanks to this extraordinarily significant archive, Trinity Library is expanding its 20th century literary collections. Collections enhance each other. So for instance, it's extremely helpful to scholars that we now have substantial material relating to Patrick Kavanagh, whom Brendan knew and admired. I hope that the Brendan Kennelly Archive will be an encouragement to others with important literary and historic archives to donate them to Trinity Library. This is an exciting time for the library. We are currently embarked on a large-scale library renewal project, which will enable us to conserve, digitize, and open up our remarkable collections. We've now got planning permission to renovate the old library, including to create a new research collections study centre in the colonnades. I'm delighted that the cataloguing of Brendan's archive is part of this great bibliothekal drive. It's now my pleasure to read a message from Antúchtaran Michael D. Higgins. Message from President Michael D. Higgins at the online announcement of the archiving of Brendan Kennelly's Literary Archive in the Library of Trinity College, Dublin. May I say what a pleasure it is to send my best wishes to Brendan Kennelly on this important occasion. How appropriate too it is that we mark the work of Brendan in a special way during a time when so many have turned to poetry for reassurance and hope at a time of great uncertainty and challenge. Across a long and greatly distinguished career, Brendan's contributions to Irish literature have been immeasurable. The making available of his work in this new and expanded way, work as a poet, scholar, playwright, editor, and teacher, is such a significant and welcome moment in the literary life of our nation, and one for which we can be truly grateful. Brendan's great body of work, offered in texts, but also in performance to audiences at venues all over Ireland, stretches back over 70 years, beautifully capturing the many shades and moods of an ever-changing Ireland. He challenges and questions, confronts new truths, vindicates the necessary freedom of space of expression and dialogue that includes the inner life of the guilty. Brendan's work brings his readers into places of new possibilities not yet realized. Brendan is a poet of insight, compassion, and profound empathy, speaking for citizens in all their complexities and vulnerabilities, bringing us deep into the spirit and soul of the other and guiding us through the dark spaces they so often inhabit. Like all great writings, Brendan's imbues his work with a great honesty that is full of risk and real courage. As a sincere and authentic poet, he has never been afraid to delve deep within the darkness of his own emotions, to offer the flaws that he sees within himself. It is those qualities which have made Brendan one of our greatest living poets, with work not confined to the page, but resonating from a life lived in a spirit of wonder, care, understanding, humor, and tolerance. He has given us generously of his time and companionship, as he does of his great genius and talent. It is impossible to separate Brendan the man from Brendan the writer, as those who have crossed the cobblestones to meet him will know so well. He is one of our greatest living poets whose legacy is an extraordinary one. I'm so delighted that his remarkable life's work will soon be made accessible to the scholars, writers, and educators of the future. That is a wonderful gift to future creativity and scholarship from a remarkable, talented writer and an inspirational teacher and mentor. I've had the good fortune to call Brendan a friend over many years. Like so many who have had the gift of Brendan's friendship, it is has greatly enhanced and enriched my life. 5 years ago, I had the honor of attending his 80th birthday celebration at the Abbey Theatre. The great affection in which Brendan is held by former colleagues and pupils and by so many of his contemporaries within the literary world was palpable that day. So may I join all of them again today in thanking Brendan for his unique collection of work that will now be archived in the library of Trinity College. Ver Bannacht, Michael D. Higgins, Uachtaráin na hÉireann, President of Ireland. And he has asked that we read a poem that President Higgins wrote, When the Muse Visits, for Brendan Kennelly. Poet, do not complain when the Muse visits. Welcome her in your warm abrazo. Or are you too tired for her subversive touch? A viejo who puts sleep before the touch of flesh. If she is not made welcome, she will not leave, but sigh and stay with you for a while. As all love dies, it will not be sudden, it will simply wither. Poet, hold the muse in your embrace, exhaust yourself and celebrate. Fashion into words that which most may feel but never utter. What you are allowed in the foreplay of the soul is sacred. You have been chosen, poet. Hold the muse con rispetto in your embrace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost. And indeed, our great thanks to Uachtaráin Michael D. Higgins for this wonderful address and indeed poem to mark this occasion today. Thank you. So I will now move on, Provost and guests, to introduce the librarian and college archivist here at Trinity College Dublin, Helen Shenton. Helen moved to Ireland in 2014 from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she was executive director at Harvard Library. Previously, she worked at the British Library, where she led the care of the UK's National Documentary Heritage and National Printed Archive, following positions in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. At Trinity, Helen leads the redevelopment of the old library, and especially pertinent for our celebration today, she also leads the newly launched virtual Trinity Library.
Thank you so much, Philip, and good morning, everyone. I'm so moved by the president's poem just now. It reminds me very much of, wasn't it Shelley who said that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world or of mankind? It was so touching. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm simply delighted to be celebrating the Brendan Kennelly Literary Archive today. It's a large archive. It has been held in the library for some time, and it reflects all the different facets, the several facets of Brendan Kennelly's life, and his national and his international role as a poet, as a teacher, as a public figure, as a cultural commentator, as a mentor. As the Provost mentioned, it's large. There's about 200 boxes, cartons. It's almost completely paper-based. Brendan didn't even own a mobile phone. And it's pretty well complete. It's from his earliest poetry through to his life here at Trinity. It seems as if Brendan never threw anything away. And so from an archival sense, now poets, authors, politicians' archives that we're collecting, they are already hybrid. So they started off in the paper world and then they've segued into the digital world. In fact, some are born digital already. The whole thing is born digital. And so this is unique. It's also unique in other ways. It's going to be of interest not only to scholars of Brendan's work, but to those who are interested in the work of his many literary, artistic, his political contacts and correspondence, because the collection, it's very varied. It's everything from literary drafts, theatrical ephemera, lectures, research material, workshop material, memorabilia, personal material, and a great quantity of correspondence. And so the research opportunities offered by such a collection are extraordinarily varied: literary studies, biographical studies, cultural studies. And then beyond this, there is, it's probably unique, the research opportunities offered by Brendan in his role as a public figure. So his frequent appearances on the Late Late Show, his openness about his own private tragedies, his approachable and affable personality, it inspired people from all corners of Ireland to open up their hearts to him, confiding sometimes deeply personal difficulties. And so the Brendan Kennelly Archive, it'll become a broad launch pad, if you like, for many scholarly careers in generations to come. So we're celebrating not only the Brendan Kennelly Literary Archive today, but also the first enabling step to make it available. And so we have, we're appointing an archivist who will produce a detailed archival description, which will be a combination of an inventory, which will present some difficulties given the personal nature of some of the correspondence, and a roadmap of possibilities from which all the research ambitions will develop. And then the next step after the archival description is, in time, under the broad umbrella of the recently launched virtual Trinity Library, which the Provost referenced, we hope in time, after we've archived the material, to digitize it and make it accessible, make the collections accessible to everyone from school children to scholars around the world. So on behalf of the Library of Trinity College Dublin, we're absolutely delighted to be celebrating Brendan's birthday, to be celebrating the fact we are very proud custodians of his archive, and that we're undertaking the first enabling step to catalogue this truly unique collection. And just on a personal note, I would really like to acknowledge the Provost's personal support. He has personally championed this initiative, for which we're incredibly grateful. So thank you all for being here today and to share in this very joyous celebration. And I'll hand back to Philip. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was wonderful. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Mary Mcauliffe. Mary is a historian and a lecturer in gender studies at University College Dublin, but she is a graduate of Trinity's School of Histories and Humanities, and she's delighted to be here this morning as Brendan's niece, in which capacity she'll also represent the Canelli family. Mary's also here to represent the Brendan Kennelly Literary Trust, and indeed as an alumna of the university, she represents Brendan's connection with his beloved TCD. So Dr. Mary Mcauliffe.
Thank you, Philip, and good morning to everybody. Delighted to be here on behalf of both the family and the trust. So Provost, fellows and members of the college, colleagues, family and friends, I would, as Brendan's niece and as a member of the Brendan Kennelly Literary Trust, like to thank you, Provost Prendergast, and your office and the members of the college on behalf of the trust and Brendan's extended family for organising the launch of his archive, particularly coming as it does 2 days before his 85th birthday. The trust was set up to protect and preserve Brendan's legacy, and I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of its members, including our MC here today, Philip, and the current and former members under the stewardship of our recently departed chair, Maureen Canelli, now head of the Arts Council of Ireland. I would also like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of two previous members, Professor Nicky Green of TCD and Dr. Emer O'Connor, now Director of the Tyrone Guttery Centre in Annaghmakerrig. After spending the last 60 years in Dublin, most of them in Trinity, Brendan moved back to live in North Kerry in 2016. And in 2017, my sister Bridget and I, with the permission of the college, began the process of sorting all the materials in his rooms, and there was a lot of material. Here I'd like to thank especially Jane Maxwell for all of her help and for organising the wonderful Brendan Kennelly exhibition, which can still be viewed online on the library website. I would also like to thank the School of English for supporting the creation of a database of Brendan's huge personal library, almost 12,000 books, which is now safely stored away. It took Bridget and I 2 years to sort and box the materials, other than the books, in Brendan's rooms, and there was a huge amount of material. He never threw away a letter, a draft of a poem, a lecture, a public talk, an invitation, anything. It was all there. It took us many weekends and snatched days here and there before the final boxes were moved to the library in May 2019 to join materials already deposited there by Brendan a number of years earlier, and that makes this such a huge and important archive. Among other things, they contain Brendan's original manuscripts, dating back from his teenage years when he started writing in North Kerry. Many of his handwritten lectures, public talks, drafts of those public talks, and a large collection of letters received from people all over the world, from the unknown to the world famous. During the sorting process, Bridget and I met Brendan during all of the decades of his life. We saw the dedicated poet and scholar. We saw the public intellectual and the private man. We saw the devoted son, the funny and sometimes cranky brother, the loving father, the loyal friend, the mentor to students and writers and poets, the man who constantly reached out and touched the hearts of friend and stranger alike. We saw a man who loved people, loved teaching, loved words, loved living, loved solitude, loved Trinity, and loved his home place in Kerry. All of this was gleaned from brief glances through material as we sorted it. And we were very sad at the time not to have more time to sit and read through the items that caught our interest. This is why today we're thrilled to know that in the next few years, all these words, which reflect not just Brendan's life and work, but also the times he lived in and the many people he shared his life with, will be made available to the public. And I echo the words of the librarian that this will be a hugely important archive, not just for literary studies, but as a historian, I could see its value for history, for cultural studies, for many other aspects that scholars will look to it for in coming years. His vast archive, once catalogued and accessible, will provide opportunities for academics, not just to delve into the heart of his own work, which is very necessary, but also into the heart of academic, literary and cultural life in Ireland and beyond in the last 60 years or so. It will also allow scholars to fully consider, evaluate and re-evaluate Brendan's work and his literary legacy, which we, his family and his alma mater, Trinity, and the Trust are so rightfully proud of. So on behalf of the Brendan Kennelly Literary Trust and Brendan's family, I would once again like to thank you, Provost, the library and the college. We are delighted that although he himself has now gone home to live in Kerry, his life's work remains in Trinity College. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. Those are wonderful words, and it's really special for us all here in the college this morning to have this connection through you and the family to Brendan there in Kerry, where I believe he may also be watching the proceedings from his home. Thank you very much, Mary. I'd now like to invite Professor Jarlath Killeen, who's the head of the School of English here in Trinity College Dublin and a lecturer in Victorian literature, to say a few words. Of course, Jarlath represents the school and department where Brendan Kennelly worked for many decades. Jarlath.
Thank you very much, Philip. Any academic department would be extremely fortunate to have a rock star as a senior member of the faculty. And for over 30 years, the Department of English in Trinity College had such a rock star in Professor Brendan Kennelly. As a teenager growing up in County Mayo, I only knew one thing about studying English in Trinity, and that was that you might be lucky enough and be taught by Brendan Kennelly. And that was enough to get me to sign up for the place. I think it would be fair to say that for many people, many Irish people, Brendan represented poetry itself. And in fact, he probably represented Trinity to the Irish nation. And through his public engagements, his argument-inspiring poetry, And just the sheer force of his personality, he placed the college at the center of the national debate about memory, history, and the importance of the arts and literature in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. His lectures were electrifying. And even in the 1990s, when I was a student here, it was an extraordinary experience to have to try to squeeze yourself even into a very large lecture hall to find it packed full, not just of students, but of academics from other disciplines, from members of the public, by tourists, all who had met at their business to witness a lecture from someone who possessed not just a personal charisma, but someone who could genuinely communicate an infectious love of literature that was enviable. That Brendan came to represent Trinity to the public was something of a surprise, I think not least to himself. When he came up from Kerry on a Reed sizarship at the age of 16, he was too shy to embark on his degree in Trinity, and he wasn't sure he would even fit in here. It was only after 3 years working in the ASB that he nerved himself to start on his degree in modern languages. After graduating, he embarked on a PhD on Yeats in mythology at the University of Leeds, and he was appointed a lecturer in English in Trinity in 1963. Very quickly identified as a rising star in the college, he was elected to fellowship in 1967, and after a year as a visiting professor in Swarthmore College in the US, he was appointed as a professor of modern literature in 1973. For some years, he was the head of the English department, but I think as he was the first to admit himself, his gifts were not for administration. He was really, his gift was the teaching, the communication, and the writing of electrifying poetry. For generations of students in Trinity, Brendan Kennelly was a revelation. As someone who was fortunate to have Brendan as my first teacher in Trinity College, in a small tutorial in an office in the arts building without windows, without air, I can tell you that his classes were extraordinary. They were unpredictable, exciting, motivating, and unforgettable. He was enormously generous to his students, and he had the unnerving habit of hailing you loudly by name in the middle of the street or on Front Square, and initiating impromptu conversations about everything from Ibsen to contemporary politics to the arts more generally. In fact, his accessibility was quite unconventional at a time when academics sometimes tended to hold themselves apart. And he had an astonishing memory for people and for poetry. He could meet an individual student years after he had taught them, and not only remember them, but in many cases recite a poem that they might have written for him. It was on an initiative of his, together with Davis Coakley, the eminent gerontologist and Wilde scholar, that 21 Westland Row, Wilde's birthplace, was secured as the Oscar Wilde Centre for Irish Writing in 1997. This then provided the base for the MPhil in creative writing, the first such course in Ireland, with Brendan Kennelly as its co-director. Appropriately, the library in the centre is now named after him. Brendan did not believe that the teaching of literature should be confined to the university. He was extremely active in outreach, reading to audiences all over the country, appearing, as Helen said, on the Late Late Show many, many times, becoming kind of one of the most recognized guests of Gay Byrne. He spoke in schools. He led a writer's workshop in Mountjoy Prison. And even after his retirement in 2006, he was very much a figure around college, engaging with practically everyone he met. He is missed greatly as a presence on campus, and he will be long remembered by everyone who encountered him. And we send as a school our best wishes to him on the occasion of his 85th birthday. The school is delighted that the Brendan Kennelly Archive is being launched today, and we'd like to thank the Provost who took the lead on this initiative. And we are very excited by the possibilities that will be opened up to scholars from many different disciplines in the coming years as this archive is catalogued. So thank you very much, and I'll hand you now back to Philip.
Thank you very much, Jarlath, for those wonderful memories and words about Brendan Kennelly. And I should just mention for our audience here this morning that the proceedings are being recorded, and you will be able to listen back to all of these wonderful memories and reflections of Brendan Kennelly afterwards. So I'd now like to introduce the second part of the event, where we will hear Brendan Kennelly's poems read by three wonderful readers, firstly, and then a recording of Brendan Kennelly himself reading one of his poems that was recorded just the year before last. As the title of his book, A Time for Voices, affirms, Brendan Kennelly's poetry celebrates the idea of the voice, the idea of speech, in writing, in song, in the lecture hall, or on the street, from Judas to Oliver Cromwell and beyond. And so I'm delighted on this occasion to introduce these readings in which we'll hear Brendan Kennelly's words in different voices before we hear him read a poem in the unmistakable voice that is his own. Our readings today are Lily O'Byrne, a senior fresh student of English literature at Trinity, where Brendan Kennelly taught, of course, for many years. Lily will be followed by Paula Meehan, a distinguished poet and former Ireland Professor of Poetry, one of Brendan Kennelly's former students indeed. She'll read the poem Begin. Following Paula Meehan, we will have the singer, songwriter, activist and frontman of the great Irish rock band U2, and of course, a lover of poetry and poet himself, Bono. And to conclude, as I've mentioned, we will hear Brendan Kennelly himself reading his well-known and loved poem, I See You Dancing, Father. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I look forward to working with the scholars who visit the Brendan Kennelly Literary Archive in the Library of Trinity College Dublin in the years to come.
A glimpse of starlings. I expect him any minute now, although he's dead. I know he has been talking all night to his own dead, and now, in the first heartbreaking light of morning, he is struggling into his clothes, sipping a cup of tea, fingering a bit of bread, eating a small photograph with his eyes. The questions bang and rattle in his head like doors and canisters the night of a storm. He doesn't know why his days finished like this. Daylight is as hard to swallow as food. Love is a crumb all of him hungers for. I can hear the drag of his feet on the concrete path, the close explosion of his smoker's cough, the slow turn of the Yale key in the lock, the door opening to let him in to what looks like release from what feels like pain. And over his shoulder, a glimpse of starlings suddenly lifted over field, road, and river, like a fist of black dust pitched in the wind.
Begin. Begin again to the summoning birds, to the sight of light at the window. Begin to the roar of morning traffic all along Pembroke Road. Every beginning is a promise, born in light and dying in dark. Determination and exaltation of springtime flowering the way to work. Begin to the pageant of queuing girls, the arrogant loneliness of swans in the canal, bridges linking the past and future, old friends passing, though with us still. Begin to the loneliness that cannot end, since it perhaps is what makes us begin. Begin to wonder at unknown faces, at crying birds in the sudden rain, at branches stark in the willing sunlight, at seagulls foraging for bread, at couples sharing a sunny secret, alone together while making good. Though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin.
All over again. You know how, as a man shrivels older, he dreams of returning to certain places he knew when he was young? The world is a womb. I'm 2,000 years old. Every few hundred years, I go back to the room where we had the Last Supper. I sit at the table in my ageless position. I sip a glass of wine. I see happy, celebrating men. He looks at me. It happens all over again. It's like living a poem that whips me back and forth, in and out of time, until I almost know what it means to be human. A fearless man wants to change this rotten place. I hear him speak. I see love and courage light his face. He chooses followers. I want to be a follower. I want to change the rotten scene. I know what causes men to rot. This knowledge concentrates my thought. I want to talk about it, man to man. I want to work with them. But first, let's analyze everything. Let's commandeer the energy of the chosen few. Let's get the incentives right. Let's call a special meeting. We need a strategic plan. And yes, of course, I'll do everything I can to look after the money. I'm your man. Let the myths begin.
I see you dancing, Father. No sooner downstairs after the night's rest and in the door than you started to dance a step in the middle of the kitchen floor. And as you danced, you whistled. You made your own music, always in tune with yourself. Well, nearly always anyway. You're buried now in Lislochton Abbey, and whenever I think of you, I go back beyond the old man, mind and body broken, to find the unbroken man. It is the moment before the dance begins. Your lips are enjoying themselves, whistling an air, whatever happens or cannot happen in the time I have to spare. I see you dancing, Father.